If you're a student, say, a specialty called embryogenesis, in other words, how the baby grows, then it becomes pretty clear that babies, or any living creature, they get built. They're built. So long as you know how to put those atoms and molecules together in the right way. So in a sense, in every cell in our body, if you look at the DNA, is the solution to generating an intelligent, conscious creature. So we know, in theory, we know the solution is out there, just waiting for us to discover. How long do I think it'll be before there are conscious machines?
Man has described himself in many ways. But if we concentrate on man in relation to his control over his environment, no description is more apt than the description of man as a tool-making animal. And in the short history of mankind, the majority of the tools which man has made can be thought of as an extension of his muscle power. That is, the ability to perform work faster and in greater quantity. However, in the mid-1940s of the 20th century, a different kind of tool was invented. A tool for extending certain of the powers of man's mind. This tool is the electronic computer.
Well, the word revolution is used very freely these days, and yet I think there's some meaning to the words the computer revolution. We have got an increase in computers of 1,000,000-fold, decrease in costs by 1,000, as we said before. This is a very real change. But the question still arises, will this revolution continue? It seems to me, in view of the political situation in the whole world, that no responsible group can oppose the coming computer revolution. Therefore, it seems to me we have a real one which will continue.
Yeah, robotic machines haven't really taken off in the way that people in the 50s and 60s thought they would. By now, we were supposed already to have human-level intelligence, not to mention intelligent house cleaning devices and so forth. And it's really taken much longer than people thought. We didn't have even the hardware capacity back then to create that level of intelligence. And of course not the software capability either.
Now, those of you who have PCs and have had PCs for, say, the last 5 or 10 years, pretty well all of you will be very conscious of the fact that each model that you get, the capacity is increased, like it's faster, there's more memory, and it's more or less the same price. This phenomenon is called Moore's Law. Moore is a person, Gordon Moore. He was one of the founders of the microchip company, Intel. He noticed a trend that the number of transistors that were being put on these integrated circuits, these ICs, was roughly doubling every year or so. And so he wrote about this trend. And this trend has been going on for 40 odd years. And it's thought it will continue for about another 20 odd years or more. And so, I mean, just common sense says if you take any number and you multiply it by 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times, eventually you'll get a huge number.
Well, Moore's law is just saying that every 18 months so the technological power doubles, and that's been followed for many, many years now, and despite people saying no, it's not going to be followed next year or the year after, it always happens. I think it's looking in terms of brains. Moore's law is providing us with super intelligent brains. It's saying that in 10 to 15 years time we are going to have machine brains with processing capabilities much more powerful than the human brain.
If in the 30s you met somebody, say you get some boffin, some egghead if you like, speaking on the radio in the 30s, saying pretty soon, 5-10 years into the future, it will be possible to build one bomb so powerful that it could wipe out a whole city. Well, most people would just laugh at it, think the guy's a nutcase. But the nuclear physicists of that time were starting to speculate about the possibility of a chain reaction. And the theorists at the time were starting to get very worried, because imagining scenarios of a kind of arms race between various countries, if they were armed with these very powerful new weapons that could wipe out whole cities. So they were scared that maybe humanity could be wiped out. They got very scared. But people didn't take them seriously. Certainly the general public did not take them seriously because it just sounded so nutty. I mean, you know, a whole city by one bomb? That's crazy.
The combined forces let loose, swamped the nearby ships, and crushed their thickly armored hulls like cardboard. Awe-inspiring in its significance for man, who learned how to control the atom, but must now learn to control himself.
So it really makes you think hard. Do other people, you know, the brain builders of the future, the equivalent of the nuclear physicists of the 30s and 40s, it makes you think really hard. You know, do you want to be part of this? Like, shouldn't my conscience be saying, now wait a minute, I'm a stepping stone towards all this mass horror. Shouldn't I be stopping now?
Man had released energy from within the atom in the first atomic blast.
There, miss. You see, the heterodynes are feeding back into the stimulus reaction activators, causing non-snaps of the motor control resistor units.
Oh, that's good.
No, lady, that's bad. But your regenerative circuits are tuned asynchronously, and that causes concatenation in the intermediate amplifiers.
Well, that's bad, isn't it?
No, that's good.
People in the 50s, some of them, predicted we would have human-level artificial intelligence by today, and we haven't. What conclusion can we draw from that mistaken prediction? And clearly one conclusion that we cannot draw from that is that because it hasn't been possible to date, therefore it will never be done.
From now on, I don't think there'll be the slightest trouble with your robot. Your domestic problems are completely solved.
I think rather we are learning more and more about the hardware capability that we will need to have to create human-level intelligence. We have rough estimates of that, and our fastest computers are just beginning to approach that.
Being able to process a large number of bits a second, that doesn't automatically mean that computer is going to be highly intelligent. Agree with that. But it's a necessary condition, right? You have to have that very high bit processing rate to allow an artificial brain to become artificially intelligent. What else do you need to make a machine that can process zillions of bits a second? What else do you have to give it to make that machine intelligent? Well, you've got to have the right circuitry, right? You've got to have the same sort of brain circuits that exist in our brain, but we don't know how to do that yet.
So IBM has just recently launched this Blue Brain project, which is an effort to create a detailed computational model of cortical column. Our neural cortex is divided into cortical columns, and in the first stage, with this new supercomputer, IBM wants to create a realistic, detailed neural simulation of an entire cortical column. In the longer run, of course, to add more columns, and that way gradually to build up to a simulation of larger parts of the human cortex.
If you looked at the best, the most intelligent, the most powerful robot with a computer for a brain, I'd have to say at the moment they're still probably around the bee and the wasp category, so we're talking tens of thousands of brain cells. Perhaps the best, something that Hugo de Garis has been working on, the intelligence of a cat with a complexity and a high connectivity in silicon brains rather than biological brains. There's no reason why a machine cannot have its own form of consciousness, its own form of perception, its own form of actions, as we know machines do. Probably it will be different to me.
Hey, Simone, what's up? I'm Michael.
Hello.
Please stand still for a moment and look at me.
For Osimo to recognize someone, that person must first stand in front of the robot's camera, while Osimo takes digital photos capturing a series of facial images.
I've now memorized your face.
These images are then programmed into Osimo's database and digitally linked to the person's name. So when that person gives Osimo a good look at his or her face, Osimo reads the facial topography and bone structure and matches that image with the stored computer data.
Michael, hello.
Couldn't we just avoid this whole horrible scenario by ensuring in the way we build our robots that they remain nice to us? Now, in the short term, maybe. Well, let's say the middle term, when the robots are reaching more or less human intelligence levels. Maybe we can control them to some extent by doing that kind of thing. But think about it, I'll just use a little common sense. Imagine a machine that's hugely smarter than us.
If you were to say, well, we want to put some rules into a robot's brain to stop it doing certain things, well, even now in the military domain, machines with some intelligence are built and used that don't have any such rules. So the practicalities of it are we don't do those things, and in fact some of the reasons for having the intelligent machinery that we have is to break the rules that you're trying to put in to stop them. So I think also trying to say we should limit the amount of intelligence in a machine so that it doesn't get to that of a human, that is very false and absolutely crazy. We're not really looking at intelligent machines that have an intelligence that is the same as a human. Machines already outperform humans in mathematical abilities, in memory abilities. Machines are networked. These are all big advantages for machine intelligence, which is different to that of human intelligence. So in some ways machine intelligence already has far surpassed human intelligence. We can't, if we limited it, we'd be going back about 20 years as far as computers are concerned.
When you think about the robot in Metropolis and others, these huge big figures who are very threatening, I think these robots are metaphors for the fear of technology in general, the overwhelming powers of machinery, the stamping, hammering machinery in car factories, for instance. So the robots really become a metaphor for our fear of technology in general, because once technology goes, it goes and goes and goes. It's mindless technology, and I think that those robots reflect that fear of technology in general. On the other hand, there is something incredibly intriguing about them, because other than different technologies, they share our space, they interact with us. That's a big attraction that especially attracts children, but again appalls a lot of grown-ups, because they feel that their own sense of specialness is rejected. So the whole idea is, well, if this robot is as good as I am, how am I any better than the robot? And I think that has again something to do with our inbuilt sense we want to be special and we want to be superior. Again, the Bible does talk about that humans have been created in the image of God. That actually, interestingly enough, does not, even though you might have heard so, it does not, biblically spoken, give us any sense of superiority.
I think giving machines rights in the human world is dependent on them sort of living partly in the human world. I suppose some machines do that now. They make decisions, but it's still the case that there's a human calling the shots, or we don't at the moment legally bring the machine to blame when it does get something wrong. We're getting a few sticky situations even now in the military domain, particularly when a missile maybe ends up exploding in the wrong place, and it's interesting to hear that it's still put down to human error, even though that may not be the case, but we sort of seem to want to hear that there's still a human somewhere in there. But some of the financial machines are now affecting people directly, immediately, and I guess it won't be too long before we have to face up to the legal situation of it was the machine that did it.
The problem for me is that whatever argument you make to define an AI's worth will automatically exclude human beings. So when you say, okay, AI is not yet self-aware, therefore it doesn't have a right, we can switch it off. That would exclude all babies under 3 years old. That would exclude Alzheimer patients. That would exclude patients in a coma, etc., 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 etc. Do we want that criterion? Absolutely not. Right? So if you say, you know, oh, it can't smell, therefore, you know, it doesn't have a sense of smell, therefore we exclude it from the community. Well, there are humans who don't have a sense of smell, right? So it cannot speak. Well, there are humans who can't speak. You know, I mean, whatever criteria you choose, you will always exclude human beings. So I absolutely reject the notion that we can use any empirical criteria to define when an AI is equal to us. I think we have to let society decide.
I think machines, intelligent machines, will have feelings, they will have a consciousness, maybe they already do now, but it's so different from our human consciousness and human feelings that it becomes difficult to understand. It's only when we sort of give machines some sort of emotive sense, we put ourselves or put creatures, other animals, into what the machines are doing and try and say, look, the machine is scared or the machine is friendly, that we try and put some understanding, but then almost surely that's not perhaps what the machine is like.
So AI, on the one hand, wants to figure out the mechanisms of humanity, you know, in order to rebuild a creature that is human-like intelligent. But it also wants to lay down the groundwork for when we build those critters, how do we treat them? The projects at MIT, Cog and Kismet, where I have been involved in, what made me so fascinated about them, especially Kismet, was that these critters were totally social. And that's the true way to AI, to build machines that are social, that are emotional, and therefore can become part of the fabric of human interactions. And in this case, I don't know to what extent you can still talk about a qualitative difference between them and us. If you try to bring together as seemingly different fields as AI, as a technological field, and theology, I think the only way to do that is by starting with the first question, what does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be a person? Being a human, the question we can answer with biology, and we can answer with science. Being a person is something entirely different. Being a person means I give that creature an ethical value. I treat you in a way that you are valuable. And I think both of these questions are key to both AI and theology.
So I think their feelings, their comprehension about the world, their consciousness, their understanding is and will be distinctly different from that as humans. And we won't really be able to understand why a super intelligent machine is making the decisions that it is doing. Just a simple fact that humans think about things three-dimensionally. That's fine, that's what we've evolved to do. A super intelligent machine can think in 10 or 20 dimensions. How can you reason, how can you bargain, how can you try and understand how that machine is thinking when it's thinking in dimensions that you can't conceive of?
It seems to me, in view of the political situation in the whole world, that no responsible group can oppose the coming computer revolution. Therefore, it seems to me we have a real one which will continue. Now, I believe that the reports we hear of this revolution are very misleading. They often underestimate the speed which is going on and the importance. But worst of all, they tend to emphasize the material aspects, how much we will have of this and that, how much leisure, what wonderful new things we will have, and they fail to discuss the impact it will have on our view of ourselves and our world outlook.
If you ask yourself, what question or what issue dominated 19th and 20th century global politics? Now, you could come up with all kinds of answers, but personally, I think the major question was, who should own capital? Who should own the factories? Because from that you got the classical dichotomy, polarization between capitalists and the communists. It should be privately owned, it should be communally owned, right? And for the older viewers, in 1962, the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis, you saw the movie 13 Days, for example. Humanity, we almost destroyed ourselves. We almost had a Third World War, a nuclear holocaust, over the issue of who should own capital. Now, that issue to me is relatively trivial in comparison to this question of who or what should be dominant species, because this time, in this 21st century, with this major question of the 21st century, there's so much more at stake.
Superintelligence can be defined as any kind of intellect that radically outperforms the best human brains in all fields, or practically all fields. So the way to think of a superintelligence is not to think of a computer as it is today, that's just a little bit better, sort of a really skilled chess computer that can do a few other things, but still has this narrow robotic mindset, what we think of as computer mind, which is very good at calculating, but has poor intuition. Instead, a superintelligence we should think of as a kind of all-around human genius, but even more so. A superintelligence would be a very radical thing to create. In a sense, it would be the last invention that humanity will ever need to make, because once you have superintelligence, that will then be better at pursuing scientific and technological research than we humans are. It would be smarter than us, so it would be better at carrying the scientific and technological torch forward.
As I see things developing in the future, there will be at least two major, deeply opposed philosophical groups. One group will say humanity should never build these things. There's too much risk. We would not be able to control them. They would be so superior to us that they may just treat us as pests, wipe us out. So that first group, I give them a label. I call them Terrans, based on the word terra, not as in terrorist, but terra, the earth, right? Terra firma, the earth. Now, the other group, who by definition are in favour of building these artilects, I call them cosmists. That's based on the word cosmos, because that's their perspective. These godlike, massively intelligent machines, I call them artilect, A-R-T-I-L-E-C-T, artilect.
Basically, we should assume that the superintelligence will be able to achieve whatever goals it has. And so therefore it's extremely important that the goals we endow it with and its entire motivation system is human-friendly. And the big risk is that either a superintelligence will be deliberately programmed to not serve the good of humanity, but perhaps just the corporation that builds it or the specific programmer that implements it. Or else that although the intention is to create a benevolent superintelligence, yet it turns out that the goals we give it have implications that we didn't really foresee. And I think both of these risks of the goal system of the superintelligence turning out to be unfriendly to humans is a really severe risk that we will confront whenever it is that we create superintelligence, whether it's in 20 years or 100 years.
So the Terrans will draw a line in the sand at some stage, saying, look, up to this level, okay, and beyond, no. Beyond, it's illegal. You become a criminal if you create these machines smarter than that. But they that philosophy will be opposed by the other group, the so-called cosmists, with their ideology of cosmism. And what that means is basically just in favour of building these intellects. Because to the cosmists, building these things is a kind of religion, if you think about it. I suppose most people have had the experience, you go out on some moonless night, out in the country somewhere where there are no city lights, and just look up and you see the big picture. If there are a trillion stars and say your life's not going too well, in a sense, who cares, right? There are trillion stars. So for the cosmists, the puny little human life that's snuffed out in a mere 80 years, in a universe that's billions of years old, is just nothing.
Among the dystopian future scenarios, there are different kinds. So on the one hand we have cataclysmic scenarios where humankind goes extinct, or there's a big war causing huge destruction, or some other sudden major destructive event. Another type of dystopian scenario would be more subtle, where we might continue to be intelligent and to develop, and at no point is there a really abrupt disaster, but gradually the whole evolutionary process takes our species or our intelligent descendants in the direction where we don't really want to go, and we kind of evolve down or evolve into something that we don't place value on. A third kind of dystopian scenario is that the future is great, but only for a very small fraction of all people. So you might imagine that a tiny elite, or just a single nation, or some subset of humanity get to reap the benefits of transhuman technologies, and that the rest are left out. And this is one of the reasons why transhumanist movement is active today, which is to try to work to improve access to these benefits to all people and across the globe. It's something that we might very well be able to influence depending on what kind of decisions we make today, and it's a political struggle as well as a technological matter, whether the benefits will be equitably distributed.
They're not just prepared to see like millions of people die, like in a conventional type war. They're prepared to risk the whole species dies out, billions of people. So that the Terrans can easily justify their actions, when push really comes to shove, as I see it, to just wipe them out. These arch monsters. It doesn't take much to start a war. I mean, there's been zillions of wars. I mean, there's a war going on all the time somewhere around the Earth. That's the norm almost. So you put all those ingredients together, and you have a very frightening scenario. In effect, there's a kind of third group, and they argue, now wait a minute, you don't have to think in terms of this polarization between machines versus humanity, the Terminator type scenario, because there's a third option, and this third group, call them the, let's see, what's the word, cyborg for cybernetic organism. And the argument is, by the cyborgians, if you like, a third human group, they say, well, perhaps we could avoid this issue by having human beings themselves become intellects. And in practice, that would mean like adding components to your head, more chips on top of chips, sort of thing.
Many people are attempting to use computers to replace man. I am much more interested myself in using man and machines as a working combination. Thus, the man-machine combination will find a dividing line passing gradually from man over to machine, the machine taking more and more of the burden as we learn how to use the machines, and as the machines become more powerful.
I think for me, the exciting cyborgs are the one where there's some form of integral enhancement. So there's technology that's integral with the body, but it actually gives you abilities that you wouldn't have as a human. In 2002, the implant that I had then was positioned in my nervous system here. It was a 2-hour operation, and the surgeons fired 100 electrodes into my nervous system to link my nervous system directly with a computer. I mean, partly we had fun with the experimentation, and partly from a scientific point of view, actually doing something that nobody has done before is so tremendous. It's the pioneer spirit. You know, nobody's been here before. Nobody knows what this feels like till now. That is so exciting.
Take one of our brain cells, a neuron, as they're called. That neuron is made from, I don't know, trillions of atoms, you know, a huge number of atoms. But what's that neuron doing? It's just processing a few bits per second, effectively. That's its job, that's its function. But with future technologies, you could do much the same thing using quantum computing with just a couple of atoms. So the future potential of Moore's law and the future physics of computation is so great, so enormous, that the progress along in those fields will force the issue. So with advanced nanotech computing capacities, you can show there's more computing capacity in a grain of sand that's been nanoteched, right? There's more computing capacity in that grain of sand than our human being brain's capacity by a factor of, I don't know, billions, right? So imagine a young woman, she's just given birth, and then she needs to make the decision, is she going to have her baby modified? Is she going to turn that baby into a cyborg, or effectively an artellect? So say she decides to do that. So this, you know, hypothetically, this grain of sand, in a sense, that's been nanoteched, is inserted into the human brain, that baby's brain, and it integrates itself into the brain. So that baby, in effect, is no longer human. Because, I mean, think about it. The capacity of that grain of sand is billions of times what the human brain can do. Right? So for, I don't know, 1/1000th of its capacity, of its time, is it doing human things. And the other 99.9999999% of the time, it's doing artellecty type things. So that woman, in a sense, has killed her baby. Killed in the sense the baby is no longer human. It's effectively an artellect. It's an artellect in human disguise.
But when we start modifying our brains with technology, then it does change us from the word go. Even just feeding in one electrode with maybe an extra sense, an ultrasonic sense, which we know is quite possible, then it starts to give you abilities, and you believe you can do things outside the normal realms of humanity. So your values, your morals start to change immediately. You become a cyborg. As that amount increases, so it's not just one electrode you have connected into your brain, it's 100 or 1,000. So eventually your brain, you and your brain becomes part human, part machine in a true sense. Then your morals, your ethics, I think, would be completely different.
What I'm really interested in is to try to understand the bigger picture for humanity, our place in the world, and what might lie in store for our species in the future. Particularly the way we might use technologies to enhance ourselves, or to go beyond what we currently think of as our human nature, whether it might be by radically extending the human lifespan through solving the problem of aging, or increasing our intellectual capacities, improving our memory, or taking control of our own emotional states. I think that we are right now in a transitional phase where before the end of this century we will either have gone extinct, or we will have most likely taken the step to become what you might call transhumans or posthumans, or just very enhanced humans that have reached their full potential. And I think this transition is the most crucial phase of our species' history. It's really, really important we get it right.
I think that transhumanism is quite a big group. The transhumanists are looking at all different ways of humans evolving, becoming post-human. The cyborg route is one of those. It's a fairly solid area within the transhumanist movement. I tend to be getting on with my own research largely and developing new implants, trying things out myself, and do get involved with the philosophical aspects, which I guess is what more the transhumanists are about. But I think it's a good movement in that it does open up and start allowing everybody to discuss what the possibilities are with transhumanism, because it's going to happen, and it's better that we discuss them now rather than suddenly be hit with some of the realities in a few years' time. What we're doing now, we're connected up to the intelligent home, and if I double click like that, we set the alarm off, and if I double click like that, it switches the alarm off. If I single click, then we move down the menu. I'll move down. So now I'm on the lamp, which hopefully you can see in the background. So if I double click on the lamp, then signals from my nervous system should switch the lamp on. Let me try that again for viewers at home. And again to switch it off. Isn't that magic? I think in the short term we've got possibilities of helping an awful lot of people who have problems. They're paralysed, they have multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, maybe they're blind. But technology, by linking their nervous system, their brain, to a computer, can help. If in the paralysed person's case, maybe not necessarily to bring back movement, but to allow them to control technology around them. In the long term, well, it's very exciting. Not just helping individuals that have problems, but more enhancing all of us, upgrading humans, giving ourselves mental abilities that we don't have. Extra memory, extra math are just the obvious ones. Better means of communication directly by thinking to other people, and extra sensory input. I would love to be able to sense the world in infrared or ultraviolet. At the moment, as a human, I can't, but as a cyborg, I will be able to.
There will be cyborgs. I see that as inevitable. But I don't think it's going to solve the problem. In fact, I think it'll just make it worse. Because, I mean, imagine you're a Terran and your next door neighbour starts going cyborgian, right? Starts adding components, and then suddenly the person next door is capable of learning a human language in just by, in seconds. So you would then get a real split in human capacities, because these cyborgs are no longer human in effect. They'd be sort of superhuman. So then the level of distrust between the Terrans and the cyborg people, the cyborgians, would be pretty well as bad as there would be between the Terrans and the Artlex. So if the human beings become sufficiently cyborgian, then after a while there's not much difference from the point of view of the Terrans between a fully blown artificial intellect and a cyborg.
I do not have any trouble with putting stuff in the body. However, I have to ask myself, why do people want to get something in their body? So when you, for instance, get a chip in your brain to think faster than your neighbor and therefore be better than your neighbor, then it's something bad. But again, you cannot blame the technology for it. It's your attitude, because you want to, again, be better than someone else. You want to be superior, and you use technology and money to get what you want. And, I don't mind at all to enhance the human body if it really does good. Again, humans too often abuse things they have available to make themselves better than others, and that's the danger. But I don't blame the technology available for it, but the human psyche.
I think we're certainly going to get a lot of people who do want to upgrade themselves, no question about that. And there'll be commercial interests and political interests supporting those groups. There's a lot of money to be made here, a lot of power, not just in a military sense, but in an everyday sense, in terms of who gets jobs and who doesn't. I think there's naturally going to be something of a backlash, a Luddite type of movement that says, well, why should you have those things when I haven't got those things? Just depends on how much power such people can have and how many people there are with that. But I think when implants become more acceptable, as they are becoming bit by bit, so such people, the humanists that want to stay human, the Terrans maybe, as Hugo would call them, I can't see them ultimately having much power, because at the end of the day their intellectual capabilities will be so inferior to cyborgs, those that have implants and upgrades, that the cyborgs will be able to outthink the subspecies that still are human. I think now we look at the body in a human sense and a machine sense being integrated, becoming one, so technology does become a necessary part of evolution. In some ways, perhaps it has affected how we've evolved anyway, in a small way over the last 200 or 300 years. Now it will really move things on. So as a technologically oriented person, somebody involved with technology, it does start to make you quite powerful when it comes to the type of circuitry that you can design, the way that you can drive the technology forward, because effectively it's evolving humanity into cyborgs. You are directly affecting evolution.
Well, I think that the important thing is not to ensure that the human species remain homogeneous forever. It could be a utopian future where the human species spreads out, and there are more different types of humans than there are now, ranging from uploaded humans to technologically enhanced humans to humans who just use a few simple technologies like vaccines and maybe memory enhancing drugs, to ones that reject all of this altogether. The important thing is not that we're all the same, but that a future society is such that it embraces all these different kinds of humans. We shouldn't aim for homogeneity, but rather for a society which tolerates, celebrates, and makes possible people to choose what kind of person they want to be. Whether that is an biologically natural person or somebody who uses technologies in different ways to transform themselves.
So here we are, signals. We've chosen pin number 47, lucky pin number 47, and he's actually picking up signals with my hand clenched. There we go, hand clenched, thank you very much, hand. And on this one, when I release, so we have the articulated hand, otherwise known as the snave hand, operating as a result of signals from my own nervous system. But let's assume that there are humans that are against intelligent machines being given more decisions, of which there are some, and that there are certainly some humans that are against having implants, that are against becoming a cyborg and having extra abilities. It's difficult to see much of a positive future existence for them, that clearly the world is going to be dominated either by intelligent machines or cyborgs, or a combination. That's where the future's going. So the future for an ordinary everyday human, I guess there'll be some sort of subspecies, just like we have cows now, so we'll have humans in the future. There'll be other creatures, other species, cyborgs, intelligent machines, that are the dominant life forms on Earth. And as a cyborg, if a human came to see me and it starts making silly noises, a bit like a cow does now, if a cow comes to me and says moo moo moo, I'm not going to say, yeah, that's a great idea, I'm going to do what you tell me. so it will be with a human. They'll come in and start making these silly noises that we call speech and human language and so on, and these trivial noises. I'm not going to do those silly things. Why should I? This creature's absolutely stupid in comparison to me.
Well, a cyborg would be a biological human that has integrated certain elements of technology into itself. And the exact definition is a little bit fuzzy. So if you have a hip implant, are you a cyborg or not? Or do you have to have some radical chip implant that interacts with your psyche in complicated ways? But that's the basic idea. Now, I am skeptical of the claim that we will become cyborgs in a very interesting sense. I think that most of the benefits of being a cyborg could be obtained by having the same technology outside the body. So instead of having a chip implanted in your brain, you could have a chip outside your brain, and then you could access it just like you do today with your computer, which saves a lot of cost, and you don't have to have surgery, and you can upgrade it more easily and so forth. The exception would be people with various disabilities. If you're deaf, you might benefit from having a chip that enables you to hear. But for healthy people, I don't really see the benefit, except in the longer run when the technologies become very good and you could do this easily. But by that time, I think it will be an even greater benefit to shed your biology altogether and to perhaps upload yourself. And so this intermediary stage where we will be having partly biological components in our brains and part chip implants, I'm just not sure that there will be such an interval. I think it might be too costly and difficult and risky first, and then it will just be easier to go all the way and become an upload.
It is perhaps fortunate we have found, particularly in the field of physical sciences, that our predictions based upon the mathematical models agree very well with what we observe in the physical world.
The 19th century physicist Heinrich Hertz described the concept of a model in these words: "We make for ourselves internal pictures or symbols of external objects."
This advantage is possible because we construct a mathematical model rather than a material model. I use the word construct because the mathematical equations are the construction rather than a materialistic physical model.
There are different possible routes that could take us from where we are now to a human level or a greater than human level artificial intelligence. They range from, on the one hand, the classical AI approach, which is a top-down approach where you develop a program with a logical structure and you just feed it a lot of data. And then as you move down to the other end, you reach more bottom-up approaches, which might be inspired by our increasing knowledge of how the human brain works. And at the very end of that spectrum, you have the uploading scenario.
And with nanotechnology, it will probably be possible to scan the brain in about 20 years. You know, the resolution of the scanning will be so fine, both in time and in space, that it'll be possible just to scan the brain. So we'll know where every neuron is, where every connection between the neurons is, what the strength of those connections are, and, you know, all that kind of thing. So all that information that's essential for building a brain, if you like, for knowing how a particular brain functions, how it's connected up and everything, that information could be put into a hypercomputer of the future, and so you could have a sort of carbon copy of the human brain, and presumably that copy would not die, right? You put it in a medium that's not mortal, and so in a sense you've made a copy of the original person that's now immortal.
So in the Matrix, people live in virtual reality, which is the world that they experience, the environment is simulated in a computer. But they're not really what we call uploads in the Matrix, because you still have the organic physical brain lying in vats and then being fed the input from the virtual reality simulation into the brains. An uploading scenario is where you would still have the virtual reality, but the brain itself would also just exist in a computer simulation. So in an upload scenario, you would have a computer which will simulate a brain, a particular person's brain. And then that upload can either interact with a virtual reality simulation, or it can even take control over a robotic body and then interact in the external world just as we do.
Well, there is one huge difference between downloading your brain into a computer and the Christian idea of resurrection, because that happens in a body. I cannot see how that would go on without a body. I can't see that. I am my body in interaction, and my body gives me the pleasure of life, and that's the fascinating thing. So the Christian idea is that this body, however we can imagine it, because after all we all know if we are a bird, that body rots. But we are promised if there is a life after death, it's embodied, and that I can live with. I cannot live with my brain downloaded into a computer. That I couldn't live with.
Having a copy of yourself with similar intelligence levels and motives and so on, that's relatively familiar, right? Because sort of similar to us. What I'm talking about is the potential that 21st century technologies will allow, where an intellect, in theory, could be like trillions of times above our capacities. That's what the physics says is possible.
So now imagine that you have created an upload of a human brain. You have transferred the computational architecture into silicon. So now, if everything goes well, you will have, being in this computer implementation, the same experiences that you had before. It will feel potentially the same. You will have the same memories, and you don't necessarily notice any difference. But now you are running on a computer rather than on biological grey matter inside a cranium. And this makes some difference. For one, you can speed up the computer by just moving the upload to a faster computer. So if the computer you are running on is 1,000 times faster than the human brain, then your thinking speed will also increase by a factor of 1,000. Subjectively, what this means is that the external world will appear as if it were slowed down by a factor of 1,000. So one thing you can do that would be completely straightforward is just to increase the speed of your thinking. But then, now when you're a software and you have complete control over the program that is your own mind, you can also begin to tweak it and add computational resources. What happens if you increase the number of neurons in a particular area of your cortex, or if you increase the connectivity. So it would be much easier to enhance your mind once you exist in an upload than to do the same if you have to deal with a biological brain inside a cranium. It's just much harder to manipulate it. So once you have an upload, it's easy to think that you would rapidly get what we might call weak superintelligence, which is a human-level intelligence, but that's vastly faster than any biological human intelligence. And it's possible that within a relatively short time frame, you would also get stronger superintelligence if you could develop ways of qualitatively enhancing the intelligence that you would have in the upload.
The term consciousness and the term soul are very, very hard concepts. In my opinion, people use self-consciousness to create this mythical entity that they then in turn use to deny robots the possibility of ever becoming like us. So they use consciousness as an ideology, you know, to say that AI can never become like us, and this is why I reject the whole concept. As for soul, now that's a whole different ballgame. Unfortunately, the concept of soul we have today in our society has nothing to do with the original Jewish concept of soul that also Jesus and Paul believed in. Our concept of soul is something outside of the body, something different from the body that makes us special, and this concept of soul comes from the Greek philosophy. The Jewish concept of soul is very different. In Judaism, soul is not something you have, but soul is something that emerges out of the interrelationships between the chosen people and God. So soul is an emergent phenomenon. that blesses the community. It's not something that makes me special. Okay? And when you look at the New Testament, even though it was written in Greek, they really used that Hebrew concept of soul. And it was only later, because they had to find a Greek term for it. The Greek term was psyche. And in people who had no clue of Judaism, psyche was filled with that Greek meaning. That's really that we had this misunderstanding, this real translation error that turned the concept of soul into something that is dualistic, that splits between soul and body. And so when you take this real concept of soul, the Jewish concept of soul, the term for that is nephesh. If you take that term, then of course robots can become part of nephesh. Because when we are willing to integrate them in our community, they can become part of nephesh. And so will robots ever have a soul? No, because we don't have one either. Will robots ever participate in soul? If we treat them right, absolutely.
I think a matrix scenario is a distinct possibility. I think to say no, it can never happen because it's science fiction is absolutely crazy. The possibility of a machine-dominated lifestyle is a distinct one. And as far as humans go, if you imagine you're a human, you're having whatever type of life you want fed down into your brain. I mean, it's just what's going on out there is what your brain perceives. There is no absolute reality. The reality to you is what your brain makes of it. Then if a machine is passing down signals that keep you completely happy, then why not be part of the matrix? I really do think Neo in the Matrix trying to destroy things, he's a bit of a party pooper. Life for humans in a matrix could be really cool.
There's always this myth that science is objective, and of course it isn't at all, because it's done by human. No human endeavor is objective. And I do believe that a lot of what happens in AI, a lot of what happens is actually the projection of people's own fears and hopes. I could imagine that people, you know, who want to live forever in a nice machine, that they have some trouble with their bodies. I think the big problem is that science has in many ways become our religion, and we give science the power to define who we are, even though science does not have the power. I mean, science has not the power to define us as persons. Science has only the power to define us as human beings. If you assume, and you have to do that in AI, that we are nothing but machines, and you build a machine on that assumption, and that machine acts like a human, you have not proven your assumptions, right? You have only proven that with the help of the assumptions, you can build a pretty damn cool machine. Okay? And that's nothing wrong with that. But to say that means that humans are nothing but machines is an error, is a logical error. And I think people only fall into that trap because they believe science so much. They think science is objective. They think science is more powerful. And, you know, if AI would be possible for me, I would just think to myself, and I would say that aloud, and I do say that aloud, aren't we humans great that we can build something like that? Isn't that just phenomenal? What does it say about the human race? You know? And then I would ask, so how are we going to treat those creatures we just have built? Are we going to treat them as slaves? Oh, we humans are so idiots. You know? Are we going to treat them well? Hey, perhaps we have learned something after all. You know, those would be the questions I would raise. But I would not talk about my machine status. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
We are now beginning to use the machines in entirely new ways on entirely different problems. And this is the exciting part. This is the intellectual aspect of applying the machines to completely new ideas that has so excited many people in the field.
The word nanotechnology is used to denote two quite different things. It's used to describe a range of technologies we already have today, basically just small-scale technology. And it's also used in a more specific sense to denote the ability to control the structure of matter at the atomic level. So you could build with nanotechnology in this more advanced sense you could build machinery factories all down at the molecular level and with atomic precision.
Because here, in fact, is the answer to a dream as old as man himself, a giant of limitless power at man's command. And where was it science found that giant? In the atom, a particle so infinitely small that it takes over 100 billion atoms to make up the head of a pin. Just as other millions and quadrillions of atoms are the tiny building blocks which make up everything in the world.
If you had a description of some physically and chemically stable structure and a set of instructions for how to build that, you could feed that into a nano factory or a nano assembler, which could then put together atom by atom or molecule by molecule this structure that you want to build.
Because progress is so rapid, I mean, there's going to be more progress in the next 10 years than there were in the previous, I don't know, 20 or 30. Right? So the rate of progress is speeding up. It itself is accelerating. So there's going to be hugely more change, technological change in the 21st century than in the 20th. Far more. So all these weird things that sound like science fiction to most people today will probably be realities in a time, in a fewer number of decades than we had imagined.
There are very few people who are directly trying to create super intelligent machines. And there are lots of people who are working on creating precursors that will eventually assist in the creation of super intelligent machines. So we have the whole computing industry that is producing faster computers each year.
The economic momentum. I mean, today we spend a lot of money, for example, on our cars or our house. How much money will we spend to have a really intelligent robot? I mean, that's genuinely useful, that could take the dog for a walk, bring in the mail, or if we still have mail then, babysit the kids, read stories to you, have a conversation with. I mean, if it were truly useful, how much would people be prepared to pay for that? A lot of money. And if the robots do most of the work, there will be huge industries. And then how do you stop that?
And at no point is there a natural place to stop. So it's extremely likely that this general process will just continue. Our capabilities in computing and AI and nanoscience and neuroscience will just continue to develop. And failing some breakdown of civilization or great cataclysm, then I think it's only a matter of time before we will develop super intelligent machines.
With power of this dimension at our fingertips, let's think for a moment about the possibilities of the future. Man has within his grasp the power to wipe out civilization and practically destroy the earth in a few days' time. But again, he has the power that can carry him into outer space. For the first time in history, his foot is on the threshold of the vast, illimitable universe.
And if we look back through history, then whenever humanity has progressed, has come up with new technologies, those technologies have not gone away. The people that have not wanted the technology to happen have not had their way in the end. They've disappeared. They've just had to get on with it. They've just had to accept that humanity moves forward. Progress, that's what we're about. So when it comes to AI, cyborgs, this whole genre, I can't see any way that it will not happen. This is progress.
Record keeping and accounting, control, design, and simulation is achieved through the manipulation of numbers according to instructions and rules given to the computer by the programmer. But what are these rules, and what is the relationship between numbers and the real things they are said to represent? These are some of the questions that we put to the scientist, whom we've already seen, Dr. Richard Hamming, research mathematician at the Bell Telephone Laboratory.
It seems to me that the computers, because they enable us to ask new questions, also enable us to get entirely new answers. They do not answer all the old questions, but because the questions are new, the answers are also new and very exciting.
Some of you may be thinking, if humanity builds these artefacts, isn't that just going to diminish humanity yet again? I mean, we've seen this happen so many times. You know, Copernicus said the Earth is not the center of the universe. We're just one of several planets going around the sun. And then along comes Darwin and says we're not special, we're just another kind of animal and we evolved like all the rest of them. And then Freud comes along and says we're not conscious, rational creatures, we're unconscious and have all these passions and drives which are primitive and animal-like and so on. So if humanity starts building artefacts, isn't that just going to diminish human importance even more? It's looking increasingly likely that the values of the constants in the laws of physics are so fantastically, improbably, finely tuned to allow the existence of matter and life that the suspicion, the growing suspicion is amongst a whole community of the scientists working on these problems, is that the universe is rigged. It's been engineered. It's been designed that way. I mean, of all the zillions and zillions of possible universes you could have, why is it that our universe is so fantastically finely tuned to allow us to exist? See, at the Big Bang, all there was hydrogen and helium pretty well. That's all there was. So all the other elements that we're made up of, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, all that stuff, where do those atoms that we are come from? Well, short answer is they got cooked up in stars. The stars made them. You could argue that we as human beings, we're part of the universe. And now because of our intelligence that's evolved over billions of years, we are now on the point of making a major transition away from biology to this new step. And if you are a cosmist, you could argue that the cosmic process may be part of that longer term goal. Maybe humanity is just a stepping stone. Human beings already, theorists have done the math. They've got the modelling of how to build baby universes. There's theories on this, how to do it. So if that's possible in theory, with human brains doing the thinking, what could an artefakt do? Could it actually build universes? Could it actually manipulate whatever exists to create new universes? Is that possible? Now, if it can do that, then by definition, it's a god, right? It's a creator.
Nuclear power is the basic power of the universe. As we step into this awesome realm, we seem to be standing before the presence of the Creator himself. It's enormously important that we appreciate this. And that first of all, we have reverence and respect for the power of the Creator.
I think if we build AI really like us, they will at some point ask the question, where am I coming from? And evolution and technology is not going to give them that answer, because the question where I'm coming from is the question for meaning. This is why most Christians I know have no trouble with evolution whatsoever. For them, the story of the Bible and the story of evolution tell completely answer to different questions. The one is the how question, how did everything come about through evolution, and that's absolutely powerful. But then the question, why? And that's a question that can only be answered with a story, with a narrative you can believe in. And if we build AI that is like us, of course they will start answering the same questions. They want to have meaning in their life. And so I have no question that they will create a religion for themselves. If that will be a religion with a God, with a divine entity, like Jewish and Christian thought, if that will be a religion without a divine entity, like Buddhism, I don't know. But I'm sure when they are human-like intelligent, they will create religion. There will be religions, there's no doubt in my mind, because it's key to be human, to ask for meaning.
It's very difficult to think about these possibilities and still maintain intellectual rigor and careful analysis. People have an enormous tendency to suddenly lose track of all the normal checks and balances that we apply to our thinking on more mundane issues. And the whole subject matter risks becoming a matter of a wild science fiction speculation, or it might even become a religious thing for a lot of people. And basically people's brains just switch off, and reason, logic no longer are used to deal with this, but it becomes a kind of an emotional matter, or a matter which moves into the domain of ideology and fiction and what's fascinating rather than what's possible. Now, it's very understandable why this happens, but I think it's extremely important that we apply our best critical thinking to these prospects and insist that science fiction and religion are not the only ways in which we should be approaching these topics, because so much is at stake, and there's a great need for a sober, disinterested analysis of what's actually most plausible from a scientific point of view.
But the impulse is there. So I see the cosmists tapping into that impulse, because I feel it myself. I mean, I'm not traditionally religious, but I feel a need, if you see what I mean. So my something gut level is pushing it, and my head, my scientific knowledge is rejecting it, but the impulse is still there. So if you could invent something that would satisfy the impulse and satisfy the criteria from your intellect, from your knowledge, from your science and all that. So if you like, a kind of scientifically based belief system that energizes, that creates a vision, that excites, the idea of God building that the cosmos want to do. So, I mean, all those cosmos arguments, you can't stop it, humanity's destined to be curious and strive and climb the mountains and all that kind of thing, all those arguments that are valid, but I see the major one being the religious one.
A lot of AI people are quoted as playing God. What I think is very interesting about that, there are two things that are interesting about that. One thing is those people are never in the embodiment camp. Those people are the ones who try to build intelligent machines that are disembodied and not social. You know, when you try to build bodies, you become very modest. You know, the best of engineers have worked on that one robot, and this was at this point the smartest and best robot in the world. But compared to even the smallest insect, it was pathetic. You know, so if you actually try to build bodies, you become modest. So that's the one answer to the playing God. But the other answer to the playing God, I think, for me, is more intriguing. We all are gods. We are all created in the image of God. We are all gods. That is the biggest promise God has made us, that we all have value. And so when we are creative, we repeat God's act of creation. So playing God in this, not this arrogant, hubristic meaning, but in this second meaning, is something very good. Because whenever I'm creative, I praise God's creativity in me, because I'm created in God's image. But when I create a human, the highest, most complex thing we know of, then I praise God the most.
Homo sapiens sapiens, our species, when it first emerged around 100,000 years ago, more or less. So genetically, they were as smart as us now. And yet, it took them thousands and thousands of years to perfect the technology of chipping flint, making sort of stone knives and stuff. That technology took ages to produce. And then bit by bit, things have accelerated. And then we discovered metals, and we could manipulate metals. And we went through the Bronze Age, and then the Iron Age, and Steel Age, and the Nuclear Age. So, in a sense, it's a long process, but speeding up the whole time. So, is there a kind of limit to what we can do? And that it occurs so fast that, in a sense, we hit a brick wall kind of thing. And I suppose the answer is yes, because, in a way, the intellect is that ultimate tool. Because once we build it, we are no longer the builders.
And among the things that it could devote its brains to is to improve itself, to improve its own software, to develop its own hardware. And for that reason, a lot of people think that once you get to a certain level of superintelligence, that's somewhere above current human level intelligence, you might get a rapid growth of intelligence, an intelligence explosion, where you will have cycle after cycle of self-improving AI that within a very brief period of time achieves radically super intelligent levels. And that would be radical new technological capabilities that didn't exist before, and that could transform the world virtually overnight.
Always in the past, we were the builders, we were the architects, we were the creators of it, and we were always above it in a dominance sense. But when we get to the point of creating intelligence, artificial intelligence, then that's in a sense our ultimate tool.
So it's not that the singularity is happening remotely from us and is almost out of our control, but rather the singularity is happening in amongst us. We are bringing it about.
Can you sort of sense a kind, almost like a religious awe almost? We could build gods if we wanted to.
Here before us is a tremendous potential, of benefit or of destruction, of good or of evil. Who will decide which it shall be? Well, one thing is certain, science alone can't decide it. The question will be decided by the people of the world, by you and by me. And the answer will depend upon what kind of people we are. Yes, science has given us a fearful and yet a very wonderful thing to use. How it is used will be determined by things hidden deep down in the hearts of men.
A man in a lifetime. The lifetime of all mankind is but a brief moment in the long history of this earth of ours, and only yesterday in the history of mankind has man made any significant advance in his control over his earthly environment. Computers, machines for logic, may change this more than any other of man's inventions. These machines, which have been with us less than a millionth of a second in terms of the temporal span of man's history, have already given promise of deep and far-reaching change in our way of life and way of thinking. But finally, the future is the great unknown, and the uses to which we put ourselves in relation to the marvelous machines of our own invention is perhaps the central moral and intellectual challenge of our own brief moment in time.